Okay. Um, let me open up the test session that I've been using this semester. And let me pull up the rubric here. So basically, what I'm asking you guys to do for the final exam is absolutely freaking everything that you've done until this semester. Um, Here's everything that I asked for on evaluation 1, evaluation 2, evaluation 3, and evaluation 4. And basically, you're going to do a full mix, top to bottom, of one song. And let's be clear, you're going to go to announcements. If you go to the very first announcements, PT sessions for mixing, and you go to the sessions, you have Tom's Diner and Moving Along, which are the two songs that we've been doing all semester. You now have the option of three other songs: Happy Pill, Quiet Anger, and Self Control, as songs for you to mix for your final project. I only need one song. So pick one of those three songs, mix it top to bottom, doing um, everything from the rubric. You're gonna do the EQ, do all the compression, do all the time base effects, and make sure that your gain structure is correct, following everything that we've been, all the guidelines. And you guys basically have 5 days to do a full mix on just one song. Um, so, one by one, EQ techniques. Open that new song. I should have put this in a different order. Open the new song and start with your gain structure. Like I've mentioned before, pull up the song, uh, pull up your U-lean meter on your master fader, and start getting a nice balance between all the instruments. Pan things out that you feel needs to be panned and away from center, away from the vocal, away from whatever lead instrument you're trying to focus on for the listener. Make sure that your mix has enough headroom that as you build up this mix and you add compression, EQ, verb, and effects, that you don't quickly start hitting the red. So if you are, one of the reasons I'm asking you to do a -16 to -14 is because that should have already plenty of headroom for you to move through a mix. But you might want to start with your rough mix setup at probably -18, so that as you build the song, you'll probably end up closer to -16, maybe -14. Okay? Once you have your rough mix, you got your balance, you got your panning done, make sure that you create buses for the different groups. Create a drum bus, create a guitar bus, create a background vocal bus, however you need to do it. If you want to create VCAs, and those VCAs will control the rhythm section, VCA for the vocals, or if you want to do an all around VCA so you can adjust the overall signal if you need to, cool. Kind of plan your workflow at this time. Make sure that all the buses that you create, you name them according to the job. I don't want to see any single send that says bus 1 and 2, bus 3 and 4. If you're creating a send for the drums, call it drums. If you're doing something for the background vocals, call it BGV. Okay. If you're creating a small verb, call it small verb, delay 1, delay 2, rhythm delay, whatever. I don't want to be chasing around trying to figure out what does bus 31 and 32 mean, and where does that go, and what's the signal flow behind it. Okay. Um, Try to create the same amount of effects that we've discussed. Try to have 2 to 3 different verbs prepared, um, and if you want to follow the same idea of create staging verbs where you have one verb is going to be for a little closer things, another verb is going to be for a little farther elements, and then you have these 2 verbs to establish your staging and your depth, and then you can have a third verb that can be a plate verb or something that creates some character or an effect to it. Okay. um, Make sure again no clipping. Then once you got your rough mix done, you start EQing. You figure out instrument by instrument what needs to be adjusted. Start with bass management. Anything that's not kick or bass or possibly a subsynth shouldn't have any sub information in it, right? Roll off any excess low end on any of these instruments. Um, Also, make sure that you're hearing whatever the lead instruments is, a vocal or a lead guitar. Make sure that things are not frequency masking or fighting that lead guitar, that lead instrument, let's say vocal, and work around that. So if you have a lead vocal and then you're hearing that this guitar part and this piano part are kind of clashing with each other, but you don't want to necessarily bring them back down because they're an intricate to the pulse and the groove, then pull up the EQ and start carving out some of those frequencies that are clashing against that lead vocal and create that space for that lead vocal. Um, Fix anything else that you're hearing. If you're hearing some noise on an amp and you have some weird issues on the top end, it's a little too fuzzy or grainy, you can put a high frequency filter cut and just roll that top end on that electric guitar until it allows space for whatever else you want up there. When you get into high gain guitars, fuzz guitars, you might want to reduce the high frequencies on those guitars so you leave space for the cymbals to cut through. Okay, stuff like that. Um, Show some additive harmonic EQ, like I've mentioned and shown examples of on the kick. Figure out what the frequency of the kick is that it's tuned to, and boost that frequency, boost that second and third harmonic to shape it. Go to the bass guitar, figure out what key the guitar is in, what key the song is in, and experiment with adding the root and the fifth to the bass guitar as a harmonic additive, and get a fuller bass tone and make sure it cuts through. Just give me a couple of examples of that I can see you actually did some additive harmonic EQing to shape something and make it fit better in the mix. Then any other EQs that you do will kind of just fall under tonal shaping, right? Compression, tonal shaping, compression, like we've mentioned, again, kind of anything that you do on a compressor will affect the transient response, will shape the instruments a little bit. But I do want to see that you've taken some deliberate effort into adjusting the attack and the release and the ratio to make this instrument fit within something else, or within the whole of the mix. Dynamic control, anything that you do on a compressor will have some dynamic control. But if there's an element that sticking out a little too much and you need to just kind of hold it at bay so it doesn't overpower another lead instrument, a vocal, something else, that's a good example of you showing me dynamic control of the performance. Make sure you show use of an internal sidechain, of you affecting internal sidechain, like I was showing on the dynamic EQ from Avid. You go to the side chain, you engage the high and the low pass filters, hit the little speaker so you can hear what the filtering of the sidechain is happening, adjust those filters so you're shaping how the compressor is hearing that instrument. Hit the little speaker button again, and now you're hearing, instead of the sidechain, you're hearing the actual signal. Then adjust your threshold and attack and release so you're reducing the response of the compressor to all the unwanted frequencies. For example, again, kick and bass, you can filter that low end so it's not over compressing due to too much low end energy. Then an example of an external side chain compressor, again, you can create a kick send that to a second compressor on the bass bus, and add that kick as an external side chain. Make sure you trigger it. Make sure you go to the little key for the key input, and make sure that the kick is triggering that compressor. And then if you want to filter the bass or the kick so it doesn't, again, over compress one thing or the other on the bass, have at it. Have fun with it, okay? So at least one example of an internal sidechain manipulation and one example of external sidechain usage. Show routing and use of parallel compression. And to clarify that, if you want to parallel compress the drums, create a aux where you're going to send all the drum tracks to that aux on a drum bus. And then create a second aux, assign the drum bus to it also, and put a compressor on that second aux. Smash it however you want to, and then give me a blend of non-compressed, compressed, dry, wet. But show me what I mean by show me the routing is that you understand how to create parallel processing, that you have a dry and a wet control. If you want to do that on other elements, you want to do that on a whole mix, have at it. I don't want to see you using a compressor mix knob instead of this. Okay? Time-based, we just kind of went over that earlier, but use of reverb to create a stage and a presence, use of reverb for tonal shaping, like I just worked with those two examples of these two sessions, where I'm adjusting that verb to enhance or the top end of those congas and lightening the low end of the verb so it doesn't overpower the low end of the congas and doesn't take away from the definition. So any type of tonal shaping where if you're hearing, again, the drums and the congas feel a little dark, then use a brighter verb to open it up and push that conga up. Reverb as an effect, like we just saw another example of getting this weird nonlinear metallic sounding verb fed into a normal plate verb, and creating this weird texture verb added to that string pad, and that just gave it a nice cinematic sound effect to it. Okay, that's a cool effect to do it. If you want to do other nonlinear verbs, if you want to do reverse verbs, you want to do gated verbs on snare and drums, all those are examples of verbs for sound design or as an effect. Any type of modulation, chorus verb, flange verb, sky's the limit with that. Use of delay to create staging. This gets into trying to use some delays within that Haas effect parameter of 5 milliseconds to about 35 milliseconds, where you're playing around with the delays, and the left and the right delay are going to be slightly different to push and thicken that instrument, shape it, and give it a sense of space and depth that's in a room without it necessarily sounding like you're applying verb to it. Okay? And that's a way of adding some depth and movement to it. It helps if you add a little modulation to that delay, and the modulation on the left and the right channel are slightly different. That way, you don't create a big mono delay sound, you create more of a stereo widening delay sound. Use delay for time-based uh, uh, use delay or time-based effects for tonal shaping. Again, like anything that you do in this stage and depth is going to affect the tonality. If you want to do something more deliberate, like have a delay that is just everything above 5K, everything above 1K, and it just adds this top end splatter to it. Cool. You are shifting the decay of that instrument in a different way, and that will help with the tonal shaping. And then sound design, like we saw the example today of having a syncopated delay, and that syncopated delay adds another layer to that performance of like a piano or a synth that helps create some separation and puts a little highlight and bounce on that synth, separating it from the rhythm section. Um, Sound delays as an effect could be ping pong delay, left and right, repeating back and forth if you want to do that. If you want to add that type of ping pong delay on a vocal, and every time the vocal finishes a phrase and there's time, you can put a half note or a quarter note delay and you hear that repeat echo, or you can do a ping pong echo there at the end. There's a couple of ideas of effects. Everything else is going to be, again, subject to my opinion. Name it correctly, and that's pretty much it. Any questions on this, or is there anything specific on any of these topics you guys need me to review again?
Could you go over the additive EQ again?
Additive harmonic EQ?
Yeah.
Sure. Okay. Where? Let me switch to. So let's say you're hearing the kick. Um, oh, let me switch sessions because this is the one I was routing to the analog um, console. Let me just open this one. Okay. So you have a kick. You have your kick drum here. Um, Typical normal EQing would be maybe suck out a little of that mid range, that hollowness on the kick that might not be so positive or just to your liking. You put shelving on the low end to boost the low end, and then you might just put a shelving on the top end and enhance the top end. Cool. That's your typical EQing you see a lot on a kick. But when you have so much low end information on a kick and you're trying to make that low end information fit with other low end instruments, for example, a bass, you might want to have a little more conservative approach in the sense of instead of adding everything that's low end information from the kick, you only add the low end information that is harmonically necessary, meaning a percussive instrument like a drum, you tune it to notes, whether you're deliberately tuning it to specific notes or you're just tuning it to a certain pitch that you like. There is that pitch has a frequency value, right? So using EQ to enhance that pitch that you tuned it to, and only enhance that pitch and its harmonics, its octaves, thirds, fifths above that, will help you increase the energy and definition of that kick without adding so much additional baggage of a blanket low end boost of everything. So that's what additive EQing tends to want to concentrate on. So instead of this type of EQing, you would do this type of EQing. And that stems from you see the different peaks lining up. This peak there is the tuning is the tuning of the kick. Here is the beater, the sound of the beater hitting the plastic, and that has another pitch to it, right? And then here is the little sub information that as the low end travels through one head and another head, that resonance between both heads create this other tone. So I'm enhancing this lowest frequency that the head is that the kick's reproducing, the main note I'm hearing as the main pitch definition, and a little about an octave above that, a little higher, where the kick, the beater is hitting the plastic, and that gives me a little bit of a variation in the pitch. So then let's compare the sound of this versus yes, this sounds maybe a little beefier because you are doing more, but it doesn't necessarily sound punchier or tighter or more defined. This does. To me, that has a little more impact because you're being very selective on what you're emphasizing and controlling that impact. And that comes more into play when you are trying to balance it out with other instruments that require low end. So, additive harmonic versus notice I'm kind of covering the same area in frequencies, right? I'm really covering a big chunk of those frequencies that the additive is also covering. But even though I have less frequencies that I'm emphasizing, this cuts better through the bass and almost sits on top of the bass in front of the bass. You play it again. So by being more selective with the frequencies and you're using a harmonic bass as a way to enhance that instrument, um, you're kind of conserving energy and headroom. You're not taking all this low end, boosting all those low end because you think you need all this low end to make the song sound thicker and punchier in the low end. You're being more selective, adding exactly the frequencies that you need to get more punch, get the tonality, get the instruments to cut, get still allow all the bass instruments to gel together, but you're not taking up as much headroom now because you're not doing a blanket low end bass boost. Okay. Um, Same thing when you get into the bass guitar. An example of me taking 220, which is A, and the harmonic of that, and then boosting those two frequencies. Without it, with it, I'm doing narrow bands, just slightly under a dB and a half on each, and it's just completely changing the presence and the placement of the bass in relationship to the kick. And if I open this up, in relationship to the rest of the instrumentation also. Because I'm being very deliberate to tune the bass to the key of the song by EQing it that way. Does that help, Nick?
Yeah, it did.
Okay. Any other of these topics that you guys want me to go over?
I'm all set.
Good.
Yeah, I'm pretty good.
Good. All right. Stop the recording.